Good evening, everybody, and you're very welcome to the latest of our GA Coach webinar series. Tonight we have a unique speaker, Liam Moggan, originally from Tuam in Galway, now living in Meath. Liam has been involved with coaching and coach development for over 40 years. He's been instrumental in supporting and advising in the development of coaching of the coach ed structure in Ireland, and has been responsible for the delivery of top quality training to literally thousands of tutors and coach educators. He has worked closely with coaches at all levels, from grassroots to some high performance sports, usually in the background in his own quiet and unassuming way. Liam is going to speak to us tonight about nature and nurture of coaches. Liam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to my house in County Meath, and thank you for tuning in. I've never had so many visitors, I can tell you. It was well worth the while getting the bookshelves brought in there in the last week or two. The nature and nurture of coaches. It took me a while to come up with the title. I was well into the planning of the talk before that title came about. And I'm really going to address that as a coach educator, with that hat on me predominantly, and looking at it through that filter. And some of the topics that I'll be dealing with will be obviously the role of the coach, the role of coaching, which will be slightly different, the role that sport plays in our lives, support for coaches, competition and the role that winning plays in that, and some contact or some mention about the nature of team sports. So not all of them will be dealt with in great depth. Intended outcomes, I always like to start with, and for somebody who has hung his hat for a long time on the basis that telling doesn't work, this is an interesting medium for me now, my first time using Microsoft Teams and so forth. So I'm going to go for it anyway. And in the selection of the two verbs, some people will be surprised that the first one I have selected is, by the end of this session, the coaches will reflect. Now, that was always one I kind of recoiled a little bit from when I was delivering tutor courses in Limerick, because it's a difficult one to do, to encourage someone to reflect, to look in the mirror, to examine what they find there. It's extremely challenging. But I felt it was appropriate for now, because very much now we're finding that coaches need players. Players don't need coaches. And right now we don't have the players. So it's a very appropriate time to reflect. And of course, many times we'd see that people spend too much time reflecting and too little time doing. But coaches by their nature are doing so much and so quickly and so often that they don't reflect enough. So that would be an intended outcome. The second one is that by the end of the session, the coaches will meander to places and to people and to lessons. Maybe places where they felt good, maybe places where they learned and maybe a little bit uncomfortable when they were doing that learning, but places that have a meaning for them. And my grandfather from Coonaglasha, it didn't take too long for me to get him in. He used to say that a fella that had to go to Tuam to get the news hadn't had a chat with himself for a good time. So in the meandering and the reflecting, I'm hoping you'll meet yourself, you'll have a good chat with yourself. And the challenge I'm going to put out for all of you is that you would, in the next few days, examine your own plan, come to your own conclusions, make up some of your own answers there. So that's where I'm setting out on. I decided to have a look at the bigger picture of sport on this reflection, and that took a fair test myself, in the sense that I found it difficult to explain. Now, why should I find it difficult to explain? I was an athlete, I played basketball, I was a PE teacher, I worked as a coach education development officer. I am a coach, I walk, I swim, I cycle, I watch sport, I read about sport, I think about sport. Why should it be difficult to explain it and describe it? But of course it is, because more than anything else, sport is a passion, a love, it's an experience, it's a feeling, it's a joy. And it's just something that we who are involved in it, when it's right, when we're in it, we just know it. doesn't need to be explained. We just know that. And, you know, I was thinking we're nearly seeing examples of that now with replays on the television of the old games. They lack the passion of the moment. They lack the tension of the moment. So they're quite not the same. And of course, sport is an integral part of our culture. It's woven into our being, and the history of the GAA and the history of our country are very tightly aligned. It shapes our lives, and I think any decent society, sport plays a very vibrant part. So I leave that as the description, but it's important that we do remember it is this passion, it is this love, and we shouldn't forget that. We get sucked into sport on an unusual ticket, and I'm going to use the example now. It's like we're going to go shopping and we intend to go to Pound World, and somehow we find ourselves in Brown Thomas, and we're copping on very quickly. Whoa, there's going to be a greater investment needed here than I thought. Let you're looking around the place and you're thinking, you know what, this is a nice place. I'll hang on in here, although it requires this bigger investment. So we've got sucked in now on the ticket maybe of come along to something you enjoy. But suddenly we're in the Brown Thomas and we find, well, there's more to it. It's really an environment where very soon we're into a setting where we've got to be better than somebody else at what we enjoy doing. That's knitted into it. So the ticket is come to Pound World, enjoy it. The investment is, it's a bigger picture thing, and we need to be better than somebody else at it. The coach and an element of competition begins to come in very quickly. Now, we've nailed the element of the coach quite well, I think. The idea of the coach helping, offer, serve, lighting the flame, enthusing, inspiring, feeding that passion for which it started. I think at those stages we have done that very well. The first little glimmer of a crack I would see is that it isn't always seen that both player and coach are on a two-way path, both of them on the way to improve, both of them on the path to learn together in a good relationship. And the type of things we need to improve on as coaches, one is self-belief or confidence. In the same way that players would get better at movement skills, we need to improve our coaching skills. And likewise, both players and coaches develop their social skills. So there's mind, body, spirit there, all in a very holistic way. And again, explaining why it's difficult to explain some of the processes. 66 years yesterday was the anniversary of Roger Bannister running the first sub 4-minute mile, Iffley Road in Oxford. And he mentioned in a book that the profoundly satisfying effort of three things, thought, feeling, and hard work, they were the real prizes. Thought, feeling, and hard work. Again, mind, body, spirit. The profoundly satisfying effort, he mentioned. And Brendan Kennelly, the Kerry poet and wordsmith, said that effort is the heartbeat of achievement. So in laying the foundations of sport and how we enter it and the relationship developing, I want you to keep that in mind as we progress. Because now the relationship does progress, the relationship begins to grow. And there's this song, all God's creatures have a place in the choir. Well, they do. So all God's creatures have a place in the choir, some sing high, some sing lower. It isn't just for the talented or for the champions or for the early developers. It isn't for the talented, the champions, or the early developing coaches either. It's for all. It should accommodate all. And yet, the nature of team sport is that in order to become involved, you must get selected. Now, I, as an athlete in the past, I could have entered many of them. I could still enter the Dublin Marathon, London Marathon, take my pot that I'll get there. You can't do that in a team sport. Very quickly, you have to be better than somebody else to get selected. Even more so, you got to be better than somebody else in a set position in order to get selected. And that applies to coaches too. They too need to get selected. So the little barriers beginning, or obstacles beginning to come in there. But once selected, the path and the challenge for all and the personal development should be the same for both coach and player, because sport it's a resource for good. It is for everybody. And an intriguing aspect of it right now, whether you're coaching seniors or younger people, the coach is a unique person, the player is unique, and the relationship between coach and player, well, that's an experiment of one. So it's very difficult to define it or describe it or explain it or examine it, because that relationship has never happened before. So now we're into a very, very critical stage. And now I'd say to myself, hold your horses here, Lee. Because now, very quickly, it's not really about what coaches do. It's about how players learn. Now, it's not only about what coaches do, it's about how coaches learn. Now, it's really about setting up a climate of learning for both the coaches and the players. A good friend of mine in Coaching Ireland, Declan O'Leary, asked 3 great questions one time. You can answer them in your head if you like. But the first set of 3 questions were, who is the best coach of every player? Who is the best educator of every coach? Who is responsible for every playing performance? Excuse me. Now, the easy answer is the player and the support around them for all of those 3. But a question we don't ask enough is, who's the best coach of every coach? Who's the best facilitator of every coach? Who's responsible for every coaching performance? And of course, the answer there is, it is the coach and the team of support for that coach, if it exists. But the same questions need to be asked, because now it's about a climate of learning for both. It is a very critical time. We have, I think, nailed the fact that coaches set the climate of learning for players. They keep going with the help, the serve, the offer, to light the flame, to enthuse and to inspire. But who does it now for the coaches? And this is where I feel clubs have an obligation to set a climate for coaches. They need, in the main, to up their game, not making any comparisons or comment on, because I don't know enough about it. But what I see at the end of it, that support for coaches is vital, and it must start with clubs. Let's see what the coaches do now. They help the players to accelerate their learning. They facilitate the players' learning. They raise their awareness, more aware and able to make appropriate decisions about what's around them. The same need be in place for the coaches. The structure needs to be there within the club to help the coach accelerate their learning, facilitate their learning, and raise their awareness. Now, I'll come back to awareness in a moment. But one of the early missions we had in Coaching Ireland was to get more coaches. More and better coaches was the tagline. We nailed the more coaches quite quickly. It's a different setup to get better coaches. And I think that's where the club needs to be more fueled. And I'll leave that to more detail later on in order to do that. But I mentioned the word awareness there. I see awareness as being the ability to weigh up appropriate information in order to make a choice, in order to make decisions, in order to do something, in order to take responsibility. And there's those 2 linchpins, awareness and responsibility. But that awareness comes from a climate of learning where individuals can weigh up the appropriate information in order to choose. Not to do the same thing all the time, ideally to do the right thing all the time. It is a critical time, because it's now a time of choice, really. And because sport is about a passion, a love that we mentioned earlier, those who want to continue and connect to this passion will. But because it's a choice, those who don't, won't. And we see that in big numbers with players, and we see it with coaches also. So it's a critical time, because now we have to ask ourselves, how do we connect to the coaches at this critical time? How do we nurture coaches at this critical time? And in a broad sweep of an answer, my answer there is to connect to the passions that got them started in the first place. What glued them in to sport? The love of the game, their club, their community, the love of place, the wish to help to develop a group of players. The intriguing love of self, if you like, because everyone loves the thrill of the mastery of new skills, And when that's done in your community, with your hobby, with something you're passionate about, it's something very strong. Bare your soul for all to find, an honest heart and an open mind. Leo Moran from the Saw Doctors wrote that. And it isn't just because I like those lines, but I'm a friend of Leo Moran. He's from Tuam and I'm from Tuam. So the power of place, it magnifies, it amplifies the meaning that we can have from something that's just out there. So the nurture now needs to connect to the experience, the feelings and the joys that the coaches, and we want to concentrate on coaches from now on, have, to recreate the passion and the love for which they may have started in the first place, to enjoy it. But remember, they found themselves in Brown Thomas, and then now we're in a situation where they've got to be better than the people beside them, and they've got to select people who are better than other people in positions and so forth. Now is the time we've got to help them, to be patient, to provide opportunity for many, a rolling service of opportunity, to support, to encourage, and to inspire. And why is that difficult? Because when we make people aware and they weigh up the options to make those decisions, there must be a range of decisions. And right now, in the extreme, the choice is compete or be damned. Dive in to the better than the next person at doing it, or get off the pot. A choice between A and B is no choice. It's take it or leave it. And many, many, many leave it. So at this crucial time, we need to bridge that pathway, roadmap, I hate the way they're using it at the moment, but bridge that journey for the coach. So they're not diving into a place where they're working so hard now in a winning structure that they have no time to think. And of course, they lose connection with place and the real meaning of the club and community and what they set out to do, because the emphasis in the club and the structures in the club are all about winning. And again, I'm stretching the language just to make the point. There are two ways in which I see this connection is threatened. One is the appointment of coaches from outside the club. It's not done, and I don't know of it, where key appointments for chairperson, secretary, treasurer are made from outside the club. And yet there seems to be an acceptance, well, it's okay to appoint coaches from outside the club. Yet we have brought people in on the ticket of lifelong involvement, connection to place. Look at how demoralizing that is to aspiring coaches. Look at the message that is giving across. The other threatening aspect at this stage is the words we use. The GA are not guilty of this, but many governing bodies, and it's not a great guilt, but many governing bodies have what they call high performance units. And it's sending out the message that, well, what we're doing is the real stuff. And what you're doing, well, fair play to you. And look, it's all good and well. It's like what they say in Clonaglass, you go out there and do it any old how, but it's not the real stuff. And of course, the Super 8s give that message too. So if you're not doing high performance, what are you doing? If you're not super, what are you? So the passion and the love and the joy and the experience that we sold the ticket with in the first place, now that's been damaged. How do we now talk about improvement and progress? What do we now say about the feeling when you're no longer super? What about the joy when we say to you in an implicit way that what you're doing is not high performance? It's important at this stage that I also balance my view that competition is not bad. I've been around winning teams and I've loved it. I've recalled it, I've relived it, I love it. And we all need banner events and we all need role models. We started with Finn McCool maybe, but we need role models for our game that we can admire, that we can see locally, and that we can believe in. And God, don't we miss the big games now. So if ever we needed any kind of evidence at all, we need competition. So I'm not saying the competition is bad, but we must do more than emphasize winning. Any good coach is more than a teacher of the technical skills, and even the skill acquisition that we do impart has very little social value. How many of you were very good at the Rubik cube? What value is that now? How many parties did you show off your skill at the Rubik Cube? Tapping a telephone. I did it in Rathmines many years ago for a free call, a skill that's no longer needed. But even the skill of catching a ball, like striking a slitter, of hooking, blocking, scoring, we're going to slow down at it. We're not going to be proficient at that. Sporting prowess diminishes. The best athletes get slower. Janisine in a lovely song at 17. Remember those who win the game, lose the love they sought to gain. That love of sport, community, whatever, is lost when we only focus our structures and everything on winning. So what should we as coaches do, because we can empower ourselves to facilitate and accelerate our learning during these times? And what should clubs do? Well, this reflection is a great start. I have said that we now realise that we need players. Players don't need us. So our role there as helping and offering and serving should be more consolidated, and a question about why we do it, what we do, how we do it. I think it's a good time too to tap in to a passion for your club, for your place, for your community. We need to value that you're promoting and participating in an active, healthy lifestyle. We don't have a monopoly on this deadly buzz or passion that sport gives us. The arts can do it. I love listening to music. I love reading. We don't have a monopoly on that, but certainly those joys are amplified within a healthy, active body, because our bodies were designed to move. And of course, we can sell this maximum opportunity to continue as a coach, the challenge, the crack, and the company for which you may have started playing. We need to maximize the opportunity of valuing the contribution you're making now, the lifelong learning process you're going to do, the friends you're going to make and keep for life. I was involved with the Dublin hurling team, 88 to 92, with Lar Foley. We won nothing, but the friends I made then are still friends. I love meeting Sean Shanley and Hedjo, John Toomey, Shea Boland, and any one of them. Priceless value to that. But the question I asked there was, how should we as coaches promote? What should we do, and what does the club do? And the biggest single thing I think that's needed now is that we need to listen to the voices of our own coaches and our own people. And I'm talking about the club now for that. There is an obligation on coaches to nurture coaching. I'm not sure if Simon and Garfunkel ever played Croke Park. That have filled it, I'd say, but Sound of Silence, just bear with me on this. And in the naked light, I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never share, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence. 10,000 people, maybe 10,000 coaches if we imagine it, talking but not really speaking in a thoughtful, meaningful way, hearing without listening, and yet no one disturbed the sound of silence. Voices are heard on pitch side all the time. Coaches have voices. Coaches have opportunity to have their voices. We need to get out of this comfort zone now, and I would dare coaches to disturb the sound of silence for the support that they need. And that support needs to be from local up, not from top down, from inside to out, not from outside in, an obligation on the coaches. In heading on the home straight, or maybe final lap, I got a book recently from a good friend, Phil Conway, 72, shot put Olympian. And it's a book written 55 years ago called Hurling by Tony Wall. And I'll introduce him as a 5 times All-Ireland winner. So it's interesting how we need these role models and whatever. But this was published in 1965. These are the last few sentences. Just bear with me because I'll go through the verbs in it in a moment. He says, there is hardly a place of this island which has not got its ancient tales of hurling. And it is time that all places awoke again to their great heritage. They are more than welcome back and are entitled to give every help and encouragement they can be given. in these pages, I've tried to help by setting down and passing on all the information and hurling lore I have gathered in a lifetime of hurling. I will be satisfied if it is of benefit. So the act of serving and helping and offering is still there. He will be satisfied, again, tapping into a passion. But look at some of the verbs he used there. They will be welcome back. And that'd be a great start for clubs to do. Welcome back players and nurture them to become coaches. Welcome back coaches, or whatever level once coached, and to come back and play a role in the mehel, or group of coaches that might be there. Tony Wall used the words that they should be helped and encouraged. He even said they should be entitled to. And pass on information of hurling, the what, yeah, they need that. But I love the word lore. That, for me, it's getting into traditions of place, the stories about the people. And to acknowledge effort, the profoundly satisfying effort. Effort at what? Being there, sharing your passion, setting a good example, being attentive, being honest, being reliable, working on character development, and be satisfied with the benefits that that involvement provides, including winning. Only one team can win every competition, but look, there is that one team. But to be satisfied with all the benefits. Dale Carnegie once said that success is getting what you want. Yes, I've got it. He also said that happiness was wanting what you get. It's a great start to be happy about what you do. Happy, passion, love, again, that connection. The reflection verb, I couldn't hang my hat on doing without coming back to it in some way. And I'm going to, bear with me again, just go through a short poem that the author is unknown. So I very quickly will attach that to my grandfather from Clonagloster. I think I saw him writing it and he just forgot to title it. But look, it says the best, listen to all the action words here. The best of all the coaches are the ones who live the creed. To see good put into action is what everybody needs. I soon can learn to do it if you let me see it done. I can see your hand in action, but your tongue too fast may run. And the counsel you were giving may be very fine and true, but I'd rather get my lessons by observing what you do. Now there's that call of arms after the period of reflection. So what is it? What's my dream that coaches do? Because I've been shaped by coaches. So really I'm doing what I've been doing for the most part of my life by the coaches I'm there. So I'm very committed to the fact of how important. Well, I think coaches need to step up and to help each other in very small ways, one small thing at a time. No one can think of too many things at once anyway. But coaches within a club need to meet regularly, chat regularly, listen to each other regularly in a meaningful way. Again, we refer back to the sound of silence. So coaches need to see the value in helping each other accelerate learning, facilitate learning. We mentioned that. Clubs need to nurture their own coaches. I would like to think that that starts with local. Nurture means to rear, to bring up. It allows them to take charge of the coaching within their own clubs. The numbers, the type, the style, the connection, the love of place. And my big aspiration, my big wish, my dream, and I hope I see it someday, is that coaches would sit side by side at matches and admire the help they gave the players to play. I believe that can happen because I believe it will feed in to the passion and the love for which they have of the game and for why they're there, and it will put winning in a proper place in that loop. I do believe we need to feed the passion of everyone. All God's creatures have a place in the choir. We need to feed their enthusiasms all the time. So when a choice is made, when it wanes, we make those supports and nurture at that stage. And I believe we need to integrate fun and enjoyment for the players and the coaches into the wonderful wide world of sport. I'll end by referring to Brendan Kennelly one more time, and a phrase that I will credit him with, and I don't often dish them around, but in Kerry he said they used to say, do your best. And if you can't do your best, do the best you can. So thank you for listening, and God bless for all the work you great coaches do. Thank you. Are you still with me there, Peter?
I am, Liam.
Good man.
So what we've about 20 minutes or so for any questions that any of the audience want to ask. You might recall that there is a Q&A button. It's a speech bubble with a question mark in it. If you have any questions or comments for Liam, you could just drop those questions into that little text box there and hit send, and it'll come to me, and I could be able to speak to Liam about those things. As you get a drink of water there, Liam.
Mm-hmm.
Some things strike me at the moment about the current scenario that lots of coaches find themselves in, and you mentioned at the start about reflection and considering your own practice and so on. Is there some advice you can give to coaches maybe on specifically how they might go about doing that?
And I think meeting up is important. Reflection is all good and well, but it can be a very, very lonely place. And reflection is to see yourselves as others do, you know, and there's the person that other people see, there's your public self, there's your private self, but there's also your hidden self, the part that other people see that you don't see. So rather than going through the lonely, tedious act of reflecting yourselves, I think coaches just need to sit down and to examine at the start, what is it we're doing well here? How are we best serving, helping, offering, progressing, improving the players? And if I was doing it with a team, even a senior team, I would divide them up in threes, get them to walk the length of the pitch to come back to identify some things that went well in that particular session. Now I'd be gaining evidence as they go along. If they're not really spotting what was well done, I'm getting the evidence they didn't see that. They're not putting a value on it. So how I communicate with them can be changed. But for the coaches, they too will begin to share within their own place and their own club and their own players how best, as I said at the start, to get their own plan, their own answers. And these answers aren't easy. The unique relationship of coach and player and the experiment of one makes it always a tedious process. But it's a wonderful start if coaches from all the teams in all the clubs meet, you know, fairly regularly, get different ones to chair it, to facilitate it in a meaningful way, not just sharing articles and that type of thing. How can we do this better? More players, better players, increase the enjoyment, that kind of thing.
And for a club then, like we spoke before this call started about how so many of our clubs would view themselves as centres that their players become better and centres for player development. How can we really push clubs to become centres for coach development?
Right, the push and the encourage. It should be encouraging more. This idea of bringing in coaches from outside, you know, it isn't that prevalent, but yet it happens. And you wouldn't hear the idea of a treasurer or a president or a secretary coming in. I think we need to value the fact that coaches being isolated with a team for a year isn't the way about it. They need many coaches to be given the opportunity. They need help along the way many times. And they need to feel that they're making a valuable contribution. Now, I don't have the answer for that, so I'm not hedging it. But every club has the ability to find out the best way in which this important cohort of people can be kept, can grow, can improve, can really feel connected to the place and what they're doing. So it's more a matter for the club to sit down. They can build great facilities. They can bring teams into strength and conditioning, and they bring very high performance. So I'm not hedging it, but I think the answer, because I really believe now we're coming to a time where things need to be more localized. It needs to come from the place. It isn't a top down. It isn't an inside out. It's from inside. It is from the inside that we go out there. So I would be encouraging clubs to start asking the questions and answering that question themselves.
And a question then from Kevin in our audience: how do you go break down the silo mentality of teams within a club have to some of the issues that you spoke about, especially the concept of winning becoming all pervasive at juvenile level?
That's a huge difficulty. A huge difficulty, and I referred to things like the Super 8, which just kind of magnify in a role model way the importance of winning. That does need to be broken down. If I was talking about competition, I talk about competition, I say it's two things. One, it's the yardstick to measure improvement. So now when coaches are getting together, I would be asking, how are our players improving? If they're only improving at the skill acquisition, if they can kick the ball better, if they can strike the hurley better, well then the coach will get fed up and the players will get dropped off in the end. We need to see a broader, bigger thing. The other thing about competition is that competition is a struggle. And remember the ticket we got in with in the first place. We got in because we were enjoying this, and now suddenly, whoa, I've got to be better than somebody else to get to play. It is a major job ahead of us. The behaviour towards referees, the behaviour towards officials. And I would say, Peter, a big bugbear I have is adherence to the rules of the game, the conduct towards each other, the 4 steps. All of these things need to be addressed very, very fundamentally, because it will make coaching impossible if it isn't within the context of very set rules. They're the beginning. Good behaviour is next. And then a respect for everybody within the competition. We need the other people to be good. We need the games to be contested well. But we also need to be able to see the part in the whole thing. Look, I spent a lifetime working on it. I haven't really addressed it yet, but I think it's one of the big questions facing the GAA.
And for those coaches that might feel a little overwhelmed, looking to know where to start, to analyse themselves or to think about their coaching, what advice or what little tips could you give some of those people?
Okay, well, you've got a wonderful structure, and I'm not just saying it now, of regional development officers, of club development officers, of coach education courses, of materials online. It isn't that you stay within your own club. I would say that you go from your own club, you find out all the resources, you do invite people in to help out, to facilitate, to accelerate the learning that's happening, to reach out to those, but rather than inviting people just to come in to do what they're going to do, to reach out to them and say, this is what we'd like you to help us with. This is what we'd like you to serve us with. So you'd be giving greater clarity to the people who are coming in. You'd have your own clear mission and say, right, what's your solution to this?
You've worked for a long number of years in coach development, and a question there from one of our participants. What do you feel about the formal coach ed courses that are there and the benefit that coaches might be able to get from them?
All right, I retired in 2017, so I'm away from those coach development courses since then. Speaking personally, the biggest thing that I saw was the chance for coaches to meet each other, to share, to talk, to connect, to be away from the maddening crowd, to be away from the humdrum of things. That was huge. And when that was done in the tutor course, in my context, you were getting tutors meeting people from different sports. Now that highlighted issues, and that really transformed the whole idea of sport, because some people got involved with GAA by accident, of geography or place or people. Some got into boxing or equestrian sport or whatever. So the pluses are that getting of the family of coaching together. Now there are coaching skills rooted into the whole way in which we demonstrate. That poem I mentioned referred to, the way we communicate, the way we observe, the way we analyse. There are tips along the way, but we must learn that trade. And when I talked about accelerating learning and facilitating learning, I also say everyone can learn, not in the same way, not on the same day. So the formal coach education is a great springboard for your informal learning. And of course, in order to learn the trade, we can then use the tricks of the trade better. And what I see with some coaches who don't really develop as coaches enough, they have a few tricks of the trade without knowing the trade. So I think there's a huge value in going to these courses, to meet the others, to make the contact, with both the facilitators, the other tutors, and the other coaches. Yeah, look, that I spent my life on it, so I do think there's a huge value to it.
I think there's a huge value to coaches meeting and working with coaches from other sports and other organisations and other clubs that they might not know. And sometimes I think that the concept of winning again gets in the way of that. Well, how can I share what I do with you when we're playing each other in a match next week? Or how can I share my knowledge with you or try to learn something from you when we're competing for the same pool of players?
Yeah, of course, the coaches aren't doing that. The coaches aren't competing. They're not across the line. In a lot of other sports, Peter, the same coach might coach athletes from different clubs. The same coach might, in the very same session, have athletes who will be competing in championship events in the same race against each other regularly. In show jumping, the same coaches work with rival riders and horse combinations. That dream I had of coaches sitting together, I know it's a long way off, but that sitting together and admiring the outcome of their work, that's really what it's all about. The coaches shouldn't be there on the sideline, because during the session, they should be bringing up as many issues that they're likely to meet in a game as possible, help them to meet those, and back off and measure. Let's see how they learn. Competition is the yardstick to measure improvement. Now, I know it's far off, but that is my dream. And this idea, you know, the piece I mentioned from Janisine, remember those who win the game, lose the love they sought to gain. We're actually pushing coaches down a cul-de-sac where they're going to wonder, ooh, is that what it's all about? But the priceless value of being able to cross the road to meet someone, to share a pint with someone, to go on a journey with someone that you coached and played with many years before, that's priceless. So that's why I started off with what sport is and the way it fits into our country. We need constantly to get back to why are we here? What are we trying to do? I saw a programme of a Leinster schools rugby match recently, and the number 8 on the Leinster team was your man, de Gascoigne, who's heading one of the virology departments right now. He'd be on prime time a lot. And the number 8 on the Munster team was Axel Foley. Now, two guys who now have come into national prominence. One continued on in the sport, and the other didn't. He made a great job of his profession. So coaching, if coaches see that their role is only to help the person develop skills, wow, what a waste of time that is in the time they're with you, because those skills in the main are of no great social value. But if while they're with you, you're developing their character, you're developing the way they relate to other people, you're developing character traits that will help them in their lives and their homes and their schools and their study, now you can call yourself a coach.
We had a chat there a few weeks ago, you might recall, and we spoke about coaches being vulnerable. And is there a sort of a vulnerability that coaches need to have in order to engage in coach development, to put themselves out there and say, well, I don't know everything, and I'm comfortable knowing that I don't know everything?
Again, I've been lucky to have access. And one of the things that struck me, Peter, access to a lot of coaches. And one of the things that surprised me at the start were the coaches that came with a name or with a reputation to Coaching Ireland, the people who ended up on a tutor course without really intending to it, or those who came for help who were already a name, already very successful. In the main, they were the least confident. They were the ones who were most unsure, because as coaches, they knew the reality that they didn't know. They don't know the future. They don't know what's going to happen. The young coach thinks they know it all. They know what's going to happen in 5 minutes' time or 1 hour's time. There isn't a psychic in the world standing up now and say, oh, I knew about the coronavirus, I told you. It doesn't happen. So the best coaches are vulnerable, and that's it. They should be vulnerable. And in order to overcome that vulnerability, they plan, they prepare, they make sure they have all the ducks in order, if I was to use that analogy. And it's because they're vulnerable that makes them great. All great ideas are fragile. All great people, I think, are fragile. And the people who are managed best are the people who get these brittle pieces together and are willing to take a step to get outside the comfort zone, because A raised eyebrow kills motivation. So these people have a vulnerability. They have a fear of the unknown. They know that they don't know. They plan, and they don't necessarily always share it immediately because the eyebrow pops up and they think, oh, maybe I mightn't try that. So there is this intriguing nature of sometimes you go and you dive in there and do it and review it and learn from it. And at other times you ask questions and you share. But I would turn it, Peter, and say that it's the best coaches that are the most vulnerable and the most unsure.
A question from Liam. He speaks about drop-off between the ages of 14 to 18, and what can clubs and coaches do that to try and retain players? Do at that age groups to try and retain players?
Okay, I mean, I don't have the easy answer, but it was Damien Young, I think I heard mention the comparison between the zoo and the jungle one time. That you go to the zoo, it's the real tiger, he roars like a tiger, he looks like a tiger, and he's a tiger. But he's a whale of a lot different than the tiger you'd meet in the jungle. One a lot more dangerous than the others. So let's say a club embraces a lot of the ideas that I have for the nurturing of coaches and the nurturing and development of players. As soon as they leave that club grounds, they're now into the jungle. They're now into a place where it is competition. It is about now being better than someone else, whether you like it or not. And that's where we have to extend what clubs do. Take charge. And what I would say is an idea that I've been pushing with some. If 3 or 4 clubs got together and twice each year, each of the clubs organised a blitz, 5-a-side, 7-a-side, depending on the age group. It doesn't have to be young kids, it could be seniors. And they spend a day playing games, 5-a-side, 7-a-side, whatever, appropriate to the age they're at. They could even mix the teams. Play, have fun, stop for a break, share the sandwiches, get back out and do it again. Now we're giving a choice to many of the players who got involved to enjoy. That was their ticket, and they found, ooh, this is a bit more competitive for me, but I can pull back and this level suits me. And of course, we're also allowing the coaches extra time to develop as coaches, and players extra time to develop as players and as people. So it's the clusters, it's the blitzes, it's adding something else onto the actual game itself. So we're not just going to beat the next parish. It's great to set up in the parish, but we also start up as they're the rivals immediately. Peter, I was involved in a basketball team in Tuam. Brother Morgan came in first year, we'd never played basketball. Second year, we only played in Tuam CBS. We practiced the skills. In third year, we went to Ballinrobe, who were kingpins at the time, and they destroyed us down in the old railway storeroom in Ballinrobe. And I remember he stopped and he told us we were going to come back before the year was ended and we'd beat Ballinrobe. And then he got us to play some of the older boys of the school. John Tobin, that you'd know well, was a senior boy. He was one of those. And again, it was a challenge. Now we're into 3 years of playing basketball. 5th year, he organised blitzes. He brought other schools, and now we played lots of games. And in Leaving Cert, as he promised, we won the All-Ireland Schools basketball. Now, I'm just giving it as an example. That was 5 years in the making. The first year we played nobody. The second year we only played the same club twice and some of the older boys in the school. The third year he introduced us into more competition that didn't really have a consequence as strong as the more formal kind. So by the time we got really into it, he had rolled us along nicely. He did have a small number. The small number did stay together. We're still friends and so forth. But that's an example I'm not able to see in a lot of other cases. It might be there.
Liam, you've worked with a lot of coaches over the years, mostly in the background, and I think that probably suits you. That you know, maybe nobody knows, and it suits you that way.
Yeah.
What can you tell us? What did you learn from those coaches over the years, and were any of those, which of those guys might have inspired you?
Okay, it's not been glib to say that they nearly all would have inspired me. Lar Foley introduced me to the dressing rooms of Gaelic football. I would have known of him as a Galway man. My parents were very involved and interested in sport. I went to PE College, Brian Mullins, Pat Spillane, Mick Spillane, Tony Ward. There was lots of Brian Talty, Declan Smith, they were all there. So I was very close to it, but Lar Foley was the first. And he was hugely interesting because he was big and strong. Some people said he could be violent and was at various times. But I mentioned it at the coaching conference a year and a bit ago. He was kind, he was gentle, he was soft, and he had a passion for learning. So most times before I changed things, it was unusual to have a physical fitness person there in '88. Babs Keating brought in Phil Conway in 1989. They went and won the All-Ireland then. But Lar was always asking questions. Why are you doing that? Why that rather than that? He was willing to give a go to some things. Look, I'm not really sure whether this will work, but off you go. And I'd have to say that in many cases where he showed a lot of doubt and I showed some youthful enthusiasm, he was more correct than I. Cian O'Neill and I'm looking now to name names because I can't name them all, but Cian brought a passion of place that was huge. It mattered to Cian that it was Kildare, hugely so. He brought an academic approach of planning, of reaching to as far as he possibly could. I loved the quietness of Eamon Fitzmaurice. He was there, he was the leader, he was the mentor, but he was always a gentleman. I never remember him raising his voice or whatever, and the traditions of it meant a huge amount to him. John O'Mahony, lucky to work with for a while, again, a gentleman. There was no egos in any of these. And I suppose in most cases, sport is about filling the soul and not swelling the ego. And while these people were involved at senior level with teams who were really trying to achieve, they knew the role, they knew the place this had for their community, for their county, and they were able to put a good balance on it.
And outside of Gaelic games then?
Well, I mentioned Brian Kerr and Jerry Mullins many times, but Phil Conway in Belvedere College, who has an interest in lots and lots of different sports, and John Shields in St. David's, and Brother Dooley down in Nina, and I'm only, it's just a few, I'm even sorry I'm naming some, I'm missing out on a few, but they had a great way of sharing, this idea that I'm talking about sharing. The piece I shared with Tony Wall's book, that came from Phil Conway. A lot of the ideas that I was able to practice first as an athletics coach came from John Shields. And when you talk about the difficulty of getting groups of coaches together, Peter, I was wary of John Shields when I started teaching because he was in the opposing school. He was offering me help, and I was suspicious of him. I was saying, what's this guy going to do, trying to do? But I found his words mattered, and then I was intrigued with his delight when we begin to improve, and even to the point of beating his team sometimes. He really shared in the delight of someone being involved in the sport. We have wonderful role models out there, and I think anytime I go to your coach development conference, it's just so clear looking around the room. You have people who love what they do. They love their place. They're part of their place. So much of what is done right at the moment, the step or the critical point, as I mentioned in my talk, is this step into the competitive thing, to do something that we have to be better than someone else. Now, there's a consequence to that. It's how we dampen down the consequences. Keep the play, keep the passion, keep the striving for effort. It's good to do that. The true success is to labour. But we really need to address the way in which we look at competition at all levels.
You mentioned Tony Wall's book, and that is a great book. I'd advise anyone listening to get a copy if they can. It's a hurling book, but it's a coaching book, and whatever sport you're involved in, it's great. And we have a tradition in Gaelic games of having great resources. Eamon O'Sullivan from Kerry, about the same time, had a book, The Art and Science of Gaelic Football, that you might have read. And Dick Fitzgerald, again, Dr. Crokes in Killarney, had a book in 1915, I think it was. It was called Play Gaelic Football. Again, a really intriguing book in itself. What resources might you direct people to, or books or things that you've really enjoyed and gotten a lot from that you think people, other coaches would enjoy?
Well, I'd say look everywhere and anywhere. There was 2 books I read recently which had nothing to do with coaching. Beartown by Patrick Backman, and the follow-up to it, Us Against You. And it was about ice hockey teams. I thought it was in Sweden or some of the Nordic countries. But there was so much into it about coaching, going in and examining some of the individual players, seeing them as characters, an old style coach and new style coach, linking into community, the small village competing against the big city. I would say bring a highlighter to everything you read. Take notes everywhere you go. I mean, the references I made there today, Tony Wall, there was a poem, there was All God's Creatures Got a Place in the Sky, All God's Creatures Have a Place in the Choir, mentioned the Saw Doctors. There's something that will motivate your passion and feed the way in which you can get it everywhere. So hang on to your passion and keep on looking. And it isn't dismissing the point of you need to know your game. As someone who has over time developed a number of coaching skills, I can work so far with those who already have the answers. But I have worked in poker and in snooker and in golf and in show jumping. And I must say, rather than being afraid to go to a place where I don't have the answer and the other player doesn't have the answers, it's been really great when you then search for that answer and find it. So I would say to all coaches to keep on this process of, you ask the players, are they better than they were 6 months ago? Ask yourself the same question. Are you better than you were 6 months ago? What have you done to make yourself better? What have you read? What have you highlighted? What have you tried out? What day have you brought the players around you and said, players, I've never tried this before. I've never done this before, but here is the plan, and let's go for it, and we'll review it afterwards. You talked about vulnerable. This is the first Microsoft Teams thing that I have done, Peter. I was nervous. I gave a fair bit of thought to this in the last few days. I wanted to keep it a short duration. I had a lot of work to do on that. I have notes which are, well, dog-eared at this stage. So I would say to coaches to get out of the comfort zone, stretch your outer limits. And it's only when you're there, you'll find what it is that will help you. You'll find something that might have been very close, find somebody that was very close, but you'll only get its meaning when you stretch yourself and you get outside that comfort zone. By staying tight into what you already know and not being ambitious, you're going to run aground.
Liam, I think that's a good place to finish up. I want to say thank you sincerely to yourself. You have put in an unknowable amount of work into this over the last days and weeks since we've started chatting about doing this. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, always a pleasure to hear you, and I got some messages coming through here saying, can we have Liam every Monday morning at 10 o'clock for 10 minutes just to get us going for the week? So on behalf of everybody on the call, Liam, thank you so much for everything this evening.
Thank you very much. I have to get the bookshelves back to IKEA now. I only had them on loan. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
For everybody else on the call, we're continuing on with this series for the next number of weeks, and next Tuesday, while Liam is a Galway man exiled in Meath, we have a Tipperary man exiled in Galway. Eamon O'Shea, coach of the Tipperary senior hurling team, is our coach next Tuesday. So the registration for that session is open just now at 8:30, and you can enter any question that you want to ask Eamon in advance, and we can look at that for next Tuesday. So that's next Tuesday night again, 7:30. All it just remains for me to say is that this session will be available on the GA Learning YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and just type in GA Learning, you'll find the GA Learning account, and you'll find all of the sessions that we've had so far up on that, amongst a lot of other videos from various other sessions that we've been running over the last number of weeks and years. So again, Liam, thank you very much for everything you've done. And to everyone, I wish you all a good and happy weekend, and we'll see you all again next week.